The first thing we'll discuss of essay question number 1 for Unit 3 is the autorhythmic cells of the SA node. Here on this left side we have a action potential graph that's broken up into a few different sections, section 4, section 0, and section 3. And then next to it I have one of these cells actually drawn out. And we'll explain the ion movement through these cells using this graph here. So here at number 4, and it's numbered a little bit kind of funny, and actually this first channel is called the funny channel. That's why it's an F here instead of an Na, because it's what allows sodium in. So if we look at this cell, this IF channel, which is here in blue, is indicative of a voltage gated channel that slowly allows this sodium to move into the cell. And that is what is depolarizing here. Notice it's similar to an axon at negative 60 millivolts, but not quite as low. So it doesn't quite take as much for the SA node to reach this threshold potential here. So as the sodium is moving into the cell and depolarizing, it eventually will hit that threshold where it will start to shoot up. And that will open up these voltage-gated calcium channels right here. So there are two types of these voltage-gated potassium channel, or voltage-gated calcium channels, excuse me. These voltage-gated potassium channels are opening and flooding the system with calcium, and that is causing this over here to work. This is the sarcoplasmic reticulum, which is activating the ryanodine receptors, which is opening the gates in the SR, which are causing the sarcomere contraction, which is going to start the contraction of the heart at the SA node. But as this calcium enters, it will slowly reach this peak. It's not as up and down as other action potentials. It's more rounded. But as it reaches its peak and the calcium has all flooded in, the potassium voltage gated channels will start to open here at number 3, which are found down here in the cell. So this will start to have potassium leave out of the cell, thus repolarizing this cell back towards threshold. And it will reach threshold and drop down, where the whole system will start again. We have another small channel over here called the NCX channel, and that is the sodium-calcium exchange channel. And it keeps a solid balance between calcium leaving and sodium leaving. It makes sure that the cell has a regular amount within it, otherwise too much could go in at one time. And that is the autorhythmic cell. Next we're going to talk about the ventricular muscle, or the cardiomyocyte, the action potential, and then how the cell functions. So just a quick breakdown of the action potential. It looks a little bit different. Has some different features than the autorhythmic cell. So we still have a resting membrane potential, but it is much lower here due to the permeability of potassium in these cardiomyocytes. And it still will slowly reach threshold, and then it depolarizes very quickly again, and has a little bit different here where it will plateau before repolarizing to resting membrane potential. And there are a few added channels here that we'll talk about. So initially here, like I mentioned, at number 4, we have this extremely low resting membrane potential, and that's because of IK1 here, IK1, very similar to where it's found here. But that brings permeability very high, and so the resting membrane potential is very low. But once we move into phase 0, we have some of these voltage gated sodium channels. As these sodium channels open slowly and they start to push sodium into the cell, they're similar to other muscle cells that can fire an action potential, but they just slowly are bringing this to its peak here. Once it reaches its peak and there's sodium in the cell, these little channels here open, and they're very small, but it does a rapid repolarization. It does it very quickly. At the end of the depolarization phase, the inactivation gates on the sodium channel are closed, which won't let any more sodium enter into the cell. But at that time, just a few, and depending on the density types of your cell, just a few of these ITO channels will open that allow chloride and potassium ions to move to the cell. And there's a few different types, but it's what starts this very quick repolarization. It happens very, very fast. And then here in phase 2, this here is all a section of phase 2. So the very first thing that's going to happen is the influx of calcium right here. And this happens, and it's also called the plateau phase. This happens when it's starting to contract, when these cardiomyocytes are starting to contract. And it doesn't let... it doesn't give quite enough for the contraction to happen, and so these orange channels down here that I have drawn do a few different things. And so they're all potassium channels, and they're all here, and they happen in a cascade. They do an ultra rapid, a rapid, and a slow movement. But what they do is they are pulling this potassium out of the cell so that more calcium can enter faster. And at this point, we're reaching the end of this cascade here, of the plateau, where it's starting to fall back towards its resting membrane potential. And that resting membrane potential is when the slow potassium channels are starting to close up. These K1 channels, which are the ultra slow potassium channels, are letting small amounts in quite slowly. It will help to bring this back down to that resting membrane potential at -90 and keep it there again until these sodium channels are beginning to open because of an action potential being fired. But that's how a cardiomyocyte works. For the last part of this essay, we're going to talk about an ECG or an EKG, either one, and how the tracings are made. And this is the tracing, a typical tracing right here. So this is a heart. You have the atrium and then the ventricles down below. So this is your right atrium here. So we're looking at it as if we were looking at someone. This is the SA and the AV nodes there. An EKG is taken by placing leads all over people's bodies to find the electrical impulse, but on the heart they place the negative lead here, right next to the right atrium, and then at the left ventricle they place the positive lead. So this first wave here is the P wave. The P wave is the depolarization of the atrium at the SA node. So the size of this this hump here is produced by the vector of the depolarization. So the depolarization is moving starting here in this direction, but it's going across the entire atrium, but its overall vector is here, moving toward this positive lead. So our bump moves upward, not a ton, but it does completely go upward there. This next wave in blue is the Q wave. So the Q wave is after this electrical impulse has hit the AV node. It sends a signal to begin the ventricle contraction. The whole QRS complex is the ventricle contraction. The ventricle contraction starts here at the superior left septum of the ventricles. And it is moving in this direction here, more so away from that positive lead than anything else. It's not huge, but it is not moving toward the, I'm sorry, I think I said that wrong. It's moving towards the negative lead, which makes it point downward. It's negative going toward negative, which is down. Anything going towards the same sign is going downward. But as it starts to depolarize that left superior septum, it will start this R wave. This R wave will start to hit all of the endocardium of the ventricle, all the way around here, on both sides. And so it has a net effect going this way from all locations, going to the depolarization. Let me draw these a little clearer. So it's going in the net direction of that positive lead. So it's about to reach the myocardium and depolarize the entirety of the ventricle. But that's this R wave here is all of this on both ventricles. It's basically these walls being depolarized. And then finally this T wave, this S wave here in orange is the final depolarization of the ventricle. And the last place that it will depolarize is here on the left superior ventricular wall, right there. But again, it's moving in all directions, but it's coming more so in that negative direction, which flips the sign, because most of it is moving in this upward direction, which is causing it to give us that upside down here. And then finally this T wave right here is the repolarization of the entire heart, so this whole system can start again. This whole system will start at the apex of the heart here, and it starts to repolarize in that direction. All of it going up that way, up towards the base. And because that is a repolarization moving towards the negative lead, it will give us that upward facing hump on the EKG tracing. And that's the basics of the